extraordinary turnout, to say the least. I want to begin by thanking our sponsor, once again, BAE System. They are a giant in our New England community, and I think well represented by Tom Bishop, who is a giant himself, and a great ambassador to BAE System. So well respected, both here in New Hampshire and in Washington, D.C., and you know, BAE chosen wisely to have Tom part of the team. But he has always been so supportive of the New England Council and putting together these type of conversations with our elected officials. So I just want to say thank you, thank you. 2025 is off to a great start for the New England Council, but more importantly, you may not believe it, but we are 100 years old this year. Okay, it's extraordinary. People often say, how do you do it? You look pretty good for 100. I would say stress. Highly recommend stress. But to be 100 years old, we are the oldest regional business organization in the country. Last night we kicked off our first of 6 centennial toasts in all of the different states. And last night it was at the UMass Club in Boston, and it was very well attended. We will be here in New Hampshire on May 29th. The BVI, and we hope that many of our members of the New England Council and prominent elected officials will stop by and celebrate this historic occasion of being the oldest business organization in the country. But we also have some couple of major politics and eggs, or what we call the congressional roundtables, with other senators and members of Congress. And Senator Jack Reed will be speaking next week in Rhode Island. Congressman Richie Neal will be speaking in Boston in April. Anyone that's in Washington next week, we have Congressman Jake Auchincloss speaking. And we'll be back here, I think, April 4th, for your newly elected first-term Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander will be speaking to the New England Council as well. And then finally, some people have already talked to me about our Washington event, which will be on May 14th and 15th. Last year we had nearly 300 people from all 6 New England states came down for 2 days of hearing from elected officials, people from the administration, people from the media, great cross-section of voices to get a good perspective of what is going on in Washington. So hopefully many of you will also take advantage of that opportunity. Last year, I think we had 23 speakers at 7 different venues throughout Washington, which is, again, extraordinary. But today, we're here for a reason. We're delighted to welcome back a great friend to the New England Council and a great friend to me, and that is Senator Maggie Hassan. And she's back for her annual visit here, but she, as you know, is always available, and her staff is extraordinary. But she is somebody who is approachable, accessible, willing to meet with just about anyone, quite frankly, even beyond her own state, because her positions are so important that she has the opportunity to serve on. I mean, she serves on the Senate Finance Committee, she serves on the Health Committee, which is the Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee, Homeland Security Committee, Veterans Affairs, Joint Economic Committee. I think it also tells you what leadership thinks of her that puts her on these type of committees, because she produces. And I think also a reason that she's on these committees, and a reason why I'm such an admirer of her, is that she is bipartisan. And boy, do we need that more than ever. Someone who can say, you know, so-and-so, not a bad idea. I think I'm going to explore that, and maybe we can even file a bill together. Isn't that what we want? People working together. So that's what she does daily, and reaching out and trying to find common ground and make our country a better place, and obviously our state here in New Hampshire a better place to live, to work, to raise your children, and also maybe even to retire. All of those things, you know how I feel about her. So let's give her a warm welcome, the Honorable Senator Maggie Hassan. Okay. Okay.
There we go. Do that.
Now, this is hard talk now. This is.
But I have my dunks, so we're good.
Yeah. Okay. So the big news out of Washington, D.C. last week was to pass the CR, continuing resolution to avert a government shutdown. It would have happened last Friday at midnight if you didn't vote the way you did to keep government open. And you and a handful of other Democrats voted for that package. Your leader, Senator Schumer, has taken an awful lot of heat from his colleagues as well as progressives outside of the Washington area because of his vote and urging his colleagues to support the bill. Needless to say, a difficult vote to make. Just explain what went through your thoughts and how you got to Friday and how you voted to keep government open.
Right. Well, first of all, Jim, thank you. Thank you to the New England Council, and good morning, everybody. It's really great to be with all of you. Somebody asked me, like Monday, how are you? And I said, I'm home in New Hampshire for a full week for the first time since early January, so I'm good. But let me talk about the continuing resolution. Last week, the Senate had a choice between two terrible options. One was a partisan continuing resolution. You all know this, that when we haven't reached an agreed-upon budget, we tend to keep the budget we have and just say we'll extend it for a certain amount of time until we can get to our agreed-upon budget for the rest of the fiscal year. And what happened in this case is our appropriators, the leadership of both committees in both chambers, one Dem, one Republican in each, were negotiating a way to get to that budget. They were very close to a deal. And then what we saw was Speaker Johnson, with just Republicans, come up with what I would say is a slapdash and insufficient continuing resolution for the rest of the year that doesn't meet the needs of people in New Hampshire the way it should, or people in the country the way it should. So that was option one. Option two was to shut down the government and hope that this administration would want to sit down with Congress and actually negotiate to a better long-term resolution for the rest of the fiscal year. And in more typical times, as you all know, there are incentives for a president and Congress to come together if the government is shut down and actually negotiate and reopen it. What concerned me in particular was that once the government shuts down, and it does real harm to real people, and it does real harm to our economy when a government shuts down, because the government, of course, is the platform that allows everybody else to engage and run their businesses and do their work and make sure that our kids are going to school, all those things. But given what this administration has already been doing, Donald Trump and Elon Musk together, acting unilaterally to take actions that, as you all know, have now been ruled illegal and in some cases unconstitutional by the courts, I am not convinced that Elon Musk or Donald Trump would want to reopen the government. And that is what concerned me the most. Musk and Trump and a guy most of you have never heard of named Russell Vought, who's now the head of Office of Management and Budget, are showing authoritarian tendencies. And what do authoritarians want but the ability to grab power and act unilaterally? And since they have shown such incredible disregard for the way government serves the American people, and because they have worked, it seems to me, intentionally to sow chaos and confusion, I was very concerned that if the government closed, it would be closed for a very, very long time, and they would not have the usual typical incentives in a democracy to negotiate in good faith to reopen it. And so that's why I made the decision I did.
You know, there are some people that feel that the Democrats in the Senate are not fighting hard enough on the causes that, you know, that are important to them. But your thoughts on, does the Senate Democrats have an agenda that is cohesive, that they can work together on whatever the issue may be in the future?
Look, I think we are all, like all Americans are, absorbing what this administration has done in its first 50-something days. And yes, we know how important it is to come together and talk about what is at stake. And we are fighting very hard to make clear that the administration, along with the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans in the House, and it seems in the Senate, although we still haven't seen a budget bill come over, this is really a choice about whether there is going to be, over the next few years, budgets and actions that are focused on more and more tax cuts for billionaires, people who will be billionaires whether they get more tax cuts or not, or whether, and doing that at the expense of critical things like Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, food for our kids, highways, bridges, clean air, clean water, right? So that is what we are working to make sure the American public understands. As you all know, the House has the Republicans have the majority in the House, the Republicans have the majority in the Senate, and the Republicans have the White House. There are issues that Republicans are telling us they privately want to work with us on, but what we need is 4 Republicans in the Senate and 3 Republicans in the House to stand up and continue the work of protecting the American people. Last thing I will say is, for those of you who have known me in both my role as governor and in the United States Senate, I have worked to bring efficiency and cost savings to government throughout my career. It is a really important thing to do. There are multiple opportunities, and I've worked with Rand Paul to identify them that saved the federal government hundreds of billions of dollars. And there are ways that we could make the government more effective at the same time we reduce taxpayer costs. But what is happening with DOGE right now is random, it is arbitrary, there appears to be no analytics, no metrics, no real attempt to identify a goal and then achieve it. It just seems to be a real urge to create chaos and opportunities for corruption, and that is also something that Democrats are absolutely committed to fighting.
It must be difficult and frustrating for you as a fighter and a Democrat in the Senate when you see the polls saying that the Democratic Party is viewed favorably 29%, and the Congress is viewed favorably 21%.
Yeah.
I mean, those are pretty dismal numbers.
Look, what we need to continue to do is talk with our constituents, with the American people, and be where the American people are in terms of communicating. And that's something I'm committed to doing. That's something the Democratic caucus is committed to doing. But at the end of the day, this is about following the example of people in New Hampshire. This is about talking to each other, sharing our opinions, having our differences, but doing it with the understanding that in a democracy, everybody's perspective and opinion counts equally. And that is, of course, an ongoing challenge in this media environment, but it's something that we are working to change.
You know, another fighter is your colleague, Senator Shaheen, and she announced that she chose not to seek a 4th term. I think most people would agree that she had a very good chance of securing a 4th term, but she decided it's time to come home. Your thoughts on her career and your thoughts on maybe how the primary is going to play out?
Look, Jean Shaheen is not only a dear friend and mentor, and I still choke up a little bit when I talk about her, given the news, but look, she has defined and personified New Hampshire politics now for more than a generation, just about, right? And she has built up, from the grassroots up, a Democratic Party in New Hampshire that is strong, and she has been just an unbelievable spokesperson for and advocate for freedom here at home and around the world. a woman's personal freedom to make her own reproductive decisions, but around the world, Jean Shaheen is understood as a stalwart for democracy. And right now, it is, you can get a sense of how strong an advocate she is by just knowing that Vladimir Putin has banned her from Russia now for quite a while, because he does not want her voice there, and because she has called him out repeatedly for his brutality and his tyranny. And so last thing I will say about her is, for those of you, as you travel around New Hampshire, and you think about the fact that at least one school district in New Hampshire on town meeting day just voted for full-day kindergarten. When Jean Shaheen became governor, kids in New Hampshire didn't necessarily have access to public kindergarten. 5-year-olds didn't have access to public kindergarten. And Jeannie rolled up her sleeves and she thought, okay, the biggest obstacle is that the schools don't have space for kindergarten. So she made sure that the state would help fund kindergarten space. By the time I became governor, we had public kindergarten in every community in New Hampshire. And that, again, is a testament to her pragmatism, but of her understanding of what's really important. When you go around the state and you see beautiful, open natural treasures that are accessible to the public or are historic treasures, that's because she helped start the LCHIP program. When you see a kid going to a community health center or into the doctor's office, that may very well be because Jean Shaheen started the Children's Health Insurance Program in this state. So she has just done incredible work. I will miss her friendship and her mentorship and just her good company and sense of humor in the Senate. But I'm also very excited about her next chapter, and very excited about the next chapter. We have a deep bench in New Hampshire. We have excellent people who are considering running to fill her seat. And whoever the Democratic candidate is, whoever the Republican candidate is, look, I think the choice is going to be very clear. The Democrats are going to be talking about lowering costs for working families, making sure an economy works for everybody. They're going to be talking about individual freedom as well as freedom around the globe. And they're going to be talking about protecting Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid. And the Republican candidate, whoever that will be championing huge tax cuts for the wealthiest and corporate special interests among us, and will be talking about an international agenda that aligns us with authoritarians. And I think the people of New Hampshire will make the right choice.
So who do you think the Democratic nominee is?
Nice try.
Yeah, I mean, just between us, won't go beyond the room here. I was just curious. Speaking of somebody who spent a career in public service, I see Lou D'Alessandro is here. He spent 50 years in public service. And needless to say, I'd be remiss if I didn't say a very special thank you to our landlord allowing us to be here. That's the president of this extraordinary school here. And they're on school vacation here, but he's not on vacation. He's a workaholic and president for VASA. So I want to thank him. And, one of the many issues that the New England Council is concerned about, as you are, is NIH funding.
Yeah.
We get about $5 billion from NIH annually. We are probably the third largest recipient in the country, California, New York, but Massachusetts and New Hampshire and all the other states, we do very, very well. New Hampshire gets about $128 million. It's about 1,500 jobs. That is an area that we're very, very concerned about. We were in Maine 2 weeks ago. We had a similar event with Angus King, the senator, very concerned NIH funding in Maine. So this is across the board. But also, what I'm hoping that you and your colleagues are going to be doing, and I mean the Democratic side, is talking to the senators in North Carolina around the Duke University and Chapel Hill, and that receives an awful lot of NIH funding. Alabama, that receives an awful lot of NIH funding. That we can find ways of getting those 3 or 4 Republican senators say, we're crossing the red line now. Yeah. We can't afford to see the NIH funding cut.
Look, NIH funding, as you all know, is critical for so many reasons. You've identified some of them in your question, Jim. Let's just start with the fact that, especially in rural New England, NIH recipients are often the largest employers in their neighborhood. And then you move down to what NIH actually does, creating cutting-edge research, or doing cutting-edge research that makes us healthier, that provides the platform sometimes for technology businesses to take off, that run clinical trials that are treating real patients. NIH in DC continues to provide some Americans their health care for their lifetime. I have one constituent here in New Hampshire who's in her 60s. She has been getting her care at NIH since she was 11 years old. And she does not know right now what the status of that healthcare regimen is going to be given this administration. The good news is that, as we've seen, a court told the administration that they can't unilaterally change that indirect cost rate that is such an important part of NIH funding to our colleges, our universities, our research entities, our hospitals. And in some states where the attorney generals have chosen to sue the administration, the freeze on NIH grants has been halted as well. Meanwhile, people are making the case to the administration about how damaging this would be, and that includes some of our Republican colleagues, including Susan Collins, who just did it very publicly at a HELP hearing. But we need more of our Republican colleagues to be willing to do that. Last thing I will just say is that the notion that you would unilaterally stop ongoing clinical trials or slow the staffing of those trials is not only furthering chaos for a whole lot of people and uncertainty, but it can actually mean the difference between life and death for some of our friends and neighbors. To halt a clinical trial that somebody's life depends on for political purposes is the height of cruelty. And I still kind of am getting my arms around the fact that that is as cruel as this president appears to be.
You know, it's been reported in the news today that there are countries like China, countries in Europe and India who are now recruiting scientists and researchers who are about to lose their job at NIH. Come here, do your research here. And
yeah, look, NIH funding has been critical to our scientific edge and leadership around the world and the economy that goes with that. And again, this is short-sighted. This shows how uninformed and reckless this administration is. And I'm glad that the courts have stepped in, but it's going to take a lot more than the courts, and that's where your comment about other colleagues really comes to play. As I said at the top of my remarks, one of the challenges we have is we need more of our Republican colleagues to speak up, to push the administration, and when push comes to shove, to vote the right way.
you know, when the courts weigh in, who does the enforcement?
Well, that is the $64 million question right now, right? The good news is courts are stepping up. They are doing their jobs. The bad news is, as you've seen, Donald Trump is calling for the impeachment of at least one judge whose ruling he disagrees with. I'm pleased that the Chief Justice responded to that yesterday. I'm not sure how many people, actually saw that or heard that who need to. But at the end of the day, I am hopeful that for cases that go up the appellate ladder, including up to the Supreme Court, that this administration will follow court orders.
You know, one of the big issues also facing New Hampshire and other parts of New England is the tariffs, and tariffs on Canada, our leading trading partner, whether it's lumber, dairy products, now aluminum and steel, and there's a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel. I don't know what it's going to be on the others. It depends on the day of the week, and April 1st might be another decision day. Your thoughts on how these tariffs on the products coming from Canada as well as Mexico. How does it impact in New Hampshire?
Look, Canada is our largest trading partner. We have a whole lot of businesses, range of sizes, who have business relationships, contracts with their vendors or suppliers on the Canadian side of the border. This is really, really harmful, and it is already driving costs up. It is driving costs up as well for constituents who already got letters, for instance, from Irving Oil saying even if you've got a fixed price oil contract for your home heating oil, that contract says that we can raise your prices if tariffs are imposed, so they're going up. It's really bad for New Hampshire businesses. It's bad for my constituents. It's also really bad for our relationship with a friend and neighbor who has been our best friend in terms of our international allies, especially here in New Hampshire. Think about the relationships we have with family on the other side of the border. Think about the relationships we have with tourists who come to New Hampshire, many of whom are already canceling their travel plans for this summer, whether it's camping in the White Mountains or whether it's going down to Hampton Beach. And it's because they don't feel welcome or safe. And the tariff back and forth that you're seeing from this administration is destabilizing. It is alienating our allies, with whom we also have really strong economic relationships, and it is creating the kind of business uncertainty that every business person in this room knows really undermines your capacity to run and reach your full potential as a business, and then, of course, that has an impact on our communities. It's really bad policy, and again, you know, when you think about why the administration is doing it, they are convinced they will get more revenue, again, that will allow them to pursue tax cuts for the very wealthiest.
You know, you made a very good point about tourism being impacted. You know, I've had an opportunity to speak to some people in Vermont recently, and in particular northern Vermont, that rely on many of the Canadians coming down in the summer, and they're seeing cancellations.
Yeah.
Spoke to someone involved in tourism in Boston last night, and he said he's seeing tourism from Canada being canceled for several events in the New England area. That's a problem that I don't know if anyone anticipated, but it's one of the side effects of this tariff is having. You sent a letter with your colleague, Senator Shaheen, very concerned about Social Security. Yeah. And the Medicare and Medicaid, and I think you sent it because you heard some people say that Social Security was a Ponzi scheme. Yeah. So do you want to talk about your role in trying to...
Yeah. The actual impetus for the letter was, you know, Musk had made the Ponzi scheme comment, but then the Littleton Social Security office got put on a closure list. Littleton is the farthest north Social Security office for the state of New Hampshire. The closure of that office means that Social Security applicants or recipients in the north country of the state would have to drive at least 100 miles to get to another New Hampshire Social Security office. As you all know, the people who are applying for or need Social Security are seniors or people with disabilities by and large. And the notion that they would have to actually get in a car in rural New Hampshire and drive a long distance to get to now an understaffed and overburdened Social Security office because they're narrowing the numbers that are open is a non-starter. And it reflects the fact that while Donald Trump said that he wouldn't cut Social Security, his administration is taking actions that will make it harder for people to apply, harder for people who qualify for benefits to get them. That slows the distribution of benefits. Musk has said he wants to cut Social Security by $700 billion. So that puts a complete lie to what Donald Trump said during the campaign. And lastly, just this morning, we see that they are saying they no longer want some people to be able to apply for benefits or get requalified for benefits over the phone. For those of you who don't know, if somebody has Social Security disability, for instance, once a year they have to go through a phone interview to make sure that their status is still the same and to make sure that they still qualify for those benefits. And then they're sent a document that reflects all the questions, that says you've agreed under pain and penalty of perjury, and perjury is a serious thing, that this is the truth, and that's the way you get requalified for benefits. They're now suggesting they won't do that. That means a lot of people are not going to make it to a Social Security office to get reauthorized, and all of a sudden their benefits are going to get cut. That's what the administration is doing here. We talked earlier about one of the reasons, or the reasons I voted to keep the government open. One of the things that happens during a government shutdown is that the chief executive has the power to essentially define what is essential and what is not. And there isn't really anything courts can do about it, let alone the fact that courts eventually close during a government shutdown. But this is an example of the different ways that Musk, in particular, is trying to redefine what's essential in our government, something they'd have even more power to do in a shutdown, and kind of working around the edges, undermine the very programs that make us strong.
And I think there's, better than me, but like 340,000
people,
Granite State, that rely on their Social Security to make ends meet. So Social Security, obviously, very important here as it is so many other places. The president had an hour-and-a-half conversation yesterday with Putin. I think he was hoping to get a 30-day ceasefire.
Right.
What he got from Putin was a commitment that there will be no bombing on infrastructure or the energy facilities in Ukraine, but that was it. Your thoughts on how the administration is handling the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump is betraying America's commitment to freedom in the way he is dealing with Vladimir Putin. Ukraine is fighting for what we have: freedom, sovereignty, the ability to get up every day and make your own decisions and live your life and pursue your dreams and build your businesses and build a better future for your family. That's what the Ukrainian people are fighting for. Vladimir Putin's invasion was unjustified. It has been brutal. His soldiers have committed war crimes in Ukraine. And Trump's decision to align with Vladimir Putin, one of the worst dictators and tyrants in modern world history, is a disgrace. I want people to think about the fact that shortly after he took office, Donald Trump instructed his representatives, our representatives at the UN, to vote with Vladimir Putin. And then about a week later, he spoke for Vladimir Putin in the Oval Office. That is where Donald Trump's allegiances lie. I want you to think about the national security implications here. Not only is Ukraine fighting for what we have, and not only is it good for us to have allies who are free democracies, who will have our backs when we have theirs, to keep the free world allied and intact, but Ukraine has critical mineral resources, as we now all know, and it is the breadbasket for much of the world. And Donald Trump appears to want to hand that over to Vladimir Putin. That weakens us too. Most importantly, perhaps, is that authoritarians around the world are watching whether America has the resolve to stand for its values and for freedom. When you see a president of the United States cozying up to Vladimir Putin and aligning himself and our country with Vladimir Putin's interests, what do you think that tells China, Iran, and North Korea? It is really, really dangerous. And Vladimir Putin is not going to stop, if he gets Ukraine, moving westward. And then our NATO obligations are invoked. And so it's a really dangerous moment. It's why so many of us, including my wonderful colleague Jean Shaheen, as you all know, she's now the top Democrat on foreign relations. She's speaking out. Senator Mark Kelly just got back from a visit to Ukraine where he visited with veterans in the hospital recovering from severe injuries. And all of them in Ukraine are telling him they want to go back to the front, including men with multiple amputations. As Jean got back from her last trip to Ukraine, I said, how did it go? And she said, they just remind me of New Hampshire. They're innovative, they're strong, they believe in freedom, and they are not going to back down. And that is something we can all be hopeful about, but we need to be in this fight with them, and I'll continue to advocate for that.
You know, I mentioned Senator Angus King when we met with him 2 weeks ago. One of the issues that he is very concerned, but also very engaged in, is the Portsmouth Navy shipyard, and how important it is to the economy, not just to the state and to New England, but really the importance of it to the country and what they do in the repairs in the submarines, the Los Angeles submarines, and you know all these other different types that are very sophisticated. But only that area is able to do the job, and yet they got a shortage of workers as well. Your thoughts? And is Portsmouth on a list to be reviewed and maybe closed?
Well, I certainly hope not. And we were just with folks from the Navy League yesterday and representatives of the Australian government yesterday over in Portsmouth to talk about the strength of the Portsmouth shipyard, to talk with, we had a number of business leaders there from the Defense Industrial Base here in New Hampshire to talk with our Australian allies. And the reason for that is because under the AUKUS agreement, that's Australia, United Kingdom, and U.S., it's a security agreement. We are due to sell the Australians 3 attack submarines, which is, of course, what we modernize and repair at the shipyard. And so we wanted our Australian allies to know how good we are, and we are. The shipyard has the best on-time and on-budget performance of any shipyard in the country. We wanted to reinforce our commitment to the shipyard, which is critically important so that Australia can get those submarines, so that we can begin to have more balance in the South China Sea. One of the areas of military superiority that we still have against China is with our attack submarines. So it's really, really important that we keep on schedule for the modernization, repair, and production of these submarines. The good news is that over the course of this confirmation process with various nominees coming up at the Department of Defense or for Navy, we have been able, led by Jeannie, to pressure the Department of Defense on the issue of layoffs and hiring at the shipyard. We have gotten a commitment now from the administration that the hiring freeze of the federal government will not apply to the shipyard, and some suggestion that they also will exempt the shipyard from any layoffs. We are obviously going to have to work really hard to hold the administration to that commitment. But they, you know, right now we already know the shipyard needs to hire hundreds of new employees every year to keep up with demand. It's very important and very exacting work. It's an incredibly highly skilled and productive workforce. And last thing I'll say, if any of you didn't know this statistic, at the beginning of World War II, the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard was producing 2 submarines a year. They had been asked by the Navy to, you know, build out more capacity, which they did with a lot of foresight, because by 1944, we were producing 32 submarines in a year. We launched 4 in one day. That's how good the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard is, and we should never forget it.
Do you think there's a possibility of another BRAC commission, which is the Base Realignment Area Commission that met many years ago? We were involved in that, and the reason why they created it was to say we have too many military installations and it's time to stop and reduce and close, and we did, but we saved an awful lot. But the new administration, would they be interested in
we haven't heard about that from them. Again, they have not approached their what they refer to as efforts to downsize or right-size government. They have not approached that with any kind of analytics or transparency, so it's really hard to know, and that's one of the reasons that the chaos and confusion they're sowing is so damaging and destabilizing. But so far, they have made commitments to us about the shipyard that, you know, they're as reassuring as a commitment from this administration can be. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm. You've been such a staunch supporter of disability rights. You know how just eliminate all employees.
Right.
So your thoughts on
Yeah.
going forward with Title I and other areas that people are very concerned about?
Yeah, maybe I'll take a step back and put it this way. You are right, they can't abolish the Department of Education without congressional input, but this is an administration right now that is very focused on sidelining Congress, it seems to us. So I visited Sunset Heights Elementary School in Nashua probably 6 weeks ago now. And I arrived on a really, really cold Friday morning. The kids had been inside for recess all week because it was like 5 degrees. It was one of those really cold weekends. They were sitting in the gym waiting for me. These were kindergarten through 5th graders. Kindergarten through 5th graders. And I walked in, I expected a lot of antsy kids. And I walked into a gym full of students who were in control of their bodies, their speech, their movement. They were waiting patiently. They were waiting quietly. They engaged with me with such interest. They had prepared questions. They took their turns well. We took pictures together. Then they went off to class, and I visited some of their math classes. I visited a room where kids with disabilities were learning to use different technology that would allow them to access the same lesson plans. And terrific staff, terrific principal. And I said to the principal, so what's the secret here? They teach multiple languages at that school because they've got an immigrant and refugee population. And she said, look, we get Title I funding because a certain amount of our kids are living in poverty or close to poverty. We use that funding for resources for people that can actually help them. We get special ed funding, and that allows us to integrate all these kids with their peers and help these kids learn. And by the way, we have a mental health counselor who had just graduated from Riviere here, who works formally with about 40 kids during the course of a week, but about 100 kids at any given time over the course of the week are stopping in, seeing her, getting support. And we're able to feed the kids when we need to. That's all because of the funding that the Department of Education oversees and makes sure it's distributed appropriately. That's the success of the funding through Title I and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That's the difference it makes. I couldn't have been prouder of a group of students. I couldn't have been prouder of a school than I was that day in that school. And that's what's at stake when, again, there are these kind of reckless cuts to an agency that was established not because people were twiddling their thumbs and trying to think of a new federal agency to develop, but because there was a real need especially after we decided that young people, children with disabilities, had the same right to an education as everybody else. They needed to stand up a Department of Education to make sure that the states had the money and the technical assistance to do what was right by kids with disabilities, and in the process expand and improve education for everybody. And rather than cut education, I have sponsored every year I've been in Congress a bill that just says, how about the federal government pay its fair share of special ed? It was supposed to pay, I think 40% under the original law. We've never met that obligation, which puts enormous pressure on local school districts and local taxpayers. The thing that administration could do is help us fully fund special education and make a difference for children, families, and taxpayers in the process.
We have a new chair of the DNC, Democratic National Committee. I don't know if you had an opportunity to meet with him, but we're 593 days away from the presidential election.
But who's counting?
Are we going to be first in the nation?
Look, we're always going to be first in the nation because that's what our state law says, but also because that's what the Granite State does. We are the best place for candidates from all backgrounds with entourages, big and small and with wallets, big and small, to come and make their case to engaged people in a state that can give a candidate a full range of experiences and views in a short amount of time because of our size and because of our citizen engagement. And I will happily be making that case to the DNC, as I know my colleagues will, and have been making that case to a lot of my colleagues in Congress, and I think we'll see a lot of interest from potential candidates.
I think I've given you ample amount of time to think of your own question, but we have time for maybe one or two. I know Jill, ARP, had a question to ask, and maybe Tess. Jill?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator Hassan. You have covered a lot of
I think we're waiting for a mic. I think we have a student with a mic.
Do we have a mic
Somebody.
coming?
Yep.
Let's do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Hassan. You did cover in your remarks some information and a lot of good description of the current situation facing Social Security. But my question on behalf of AARP is what are the actions that you and your colleagues see that are possible to protect Social Security? What do you see that can happen to protect the loss of shutting down some of these field offices, as you described, delayed checks, difficulty getting through on the phone? We hear about this from our AARP constituents as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Look, thanks for the question. I'm going to get up because it just feels better. But we are advocating for to the administration about the importance of Social Security, trying to hold the president accountable for his pledge not to cut Social Security, obviously. And I expect that if there were attempts to cut benefits or further limit access, we will likely see litigation, and we will likely see the courts step in. But the most important thing people can do is talk to their friends and neighbors. If you're on Social Security, you need to tell people that you're on Social Security and the difference it has made in your life and the possibility of the cuts that this administration is talking about. If you have friends and family in states represented by Republicans in Congress, whether they're senators or whether they're members of the House, reaching out to those friends and asking them to call their congresspeople is really, really important. Because, as I said, we need 4 Republicans in the Senate, 3 Republicans in the House to stand with us on some of these issues, and to insist, too, that this administration follow the law, and Social Security, is a program established by law, established by Congress, and we have some tools there to defend it, but it is really, really important that people speak up. And I am confident that when they do, it will make a real difference.
Good. Tess? Just coming over with the mic. Community health centers.
Thank you, Senator, for your support of community health centers. You mentioned Senator Shaheen and the CHIP program, and one of your legacies is Medicaid expansion.
Right.
And Medicaid is under threat right now. 182,000 Granite Staters get health care coverage under Medicaid, and they are working in businesses across these organizations. So my question is, what can you do with your bipartisan acumen to be able to stop the deleterious effects of changing Medicaid as such an important part of a lifeblood of the health centers, mental health centers, nursing homes, hospitals? It's essential.
Yeah, Tess, thanks for the question. As Tess said, about 180,000 Granite Staters get their health care through Medicaid. And that breaks down in a number of ways. Yes, people who are working at businesses across the state, some of them are getting Medicaid. One of the most important things that I learned when we passed Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire was the number of people with chronic illness who told me they had lost a job and their health insurance. They therefore got sick. They got so sick that they couldn't go to work, but they didn't have they couldn't afford health insurance because they weren't working, so they couldn't get the medicine to manage their chronic care, and this created unemployment for chronically ill people because they couldn't get well enough to work. And the number of people, when we passed Medicaid expansion, who said to me, I got on Medicaid, I got my health care, and I'm back at work, and now I've transitioned into private health insurance, was substantial. And I want people to understand this. Medicaid expansion is a critical pathway to work for people. It also is a critical way for people to get addiction treatment and mental health treatment, something that our traditional Medicaid program didn't provide. So Medicaid expansion is a piece of the Medicaid puzzle. Nursing home care is a piece of the Medicaid puzzle. I think it's 1 in 5 seniors get their nursing home care through Medicaid. I may be corrected on that. About 15,000 seniors are impacted, therefore, by Medicaid. A lot of kids with disabilities are getting their health care through Medicaid. And the current proposal from the Republicans on the next budget would cut Medicaid by 1/3. And they keep saying, no, no, we don't mean to do that, but their own Congressional Budget Office has come out and said if you do the math and you do the cuts from the line items they're proposing, this means a 33% cut at least to Medicaid. So do not believe what they're saying. Look at the numbers and the math. The best way to protect Medicaid is for people to tell the stories of how it impacts them. The other thing to know is New Hampshire, when we passed the Medicaid expansion law, the reauthorization at least put in a clause that said if the federal government ever stops funding Medicaid expansion at least 90%, our Medicaid expansion program automatically goes away in New Hampshire. And there are 9 other states for which that is the case. So we need to tell our stories, remind the president that he has said he wouldn't cut Medicaid, and maybe I'll use this opportunity, too, to talk for a second about bipartisanship. As Jim mentioned, it is something I work to do every day because that's what the people of New Hampshire, that's the example you all set for me, which is everybody goes to work, they go to school, they work in their communities, and they don't ask each other, are you Republican or Democrat? They say, what's our challenge today? How are we going to solve it? Politically and in governing, I've always believed that one of the secrets of our success is that we have a system that incentivizes and sometimes pressures us to compromise. And that makes us creative, among other things. It's not always just settling for something. It's like, oh, maybe there's a different way to do that. And the uniquely American strength is our ability to find our way forward with these creative compromises. The problem we have right now is bipartisanship is only a reality in a democracy. It only works when everybody at the decision-making table, the negotiating table, recognizes that each and every one of us have the same rights and the same strength and the same power, and therefore we all have to treat each other's ideas just as seriously as we treat our own. When you don't have a strong democracy that ensures that everybody participating has equal rights and is being recognized as having a common love and interest in their country, then we begin to slip away from the capacity to do the kind of bipartisan problem solving that has been our strength throughout our history. And what concerns me right now is that I have Republican colleagues who I have worked with, who I admire, who I have lots in common with, who represent their constituents really well, who are aligning in a highly partisan way. They are telling us privately that they're really disturbed by what they're seeing, and I believe them. But they are not willing, for instance, to break from the Speaker and the President on this last budget and say, no, no, we should be working in a bipartisan way. We should be giving the other side a chance to have input. And we're also, right now, the next big challenge will be getting to next year's budget, and the Republicans are likely to do this reconciliation package. And it's something they only need 51 votes for in the Senate. They are not reaching out to us to get our ideas and to work with us on that. And that is, not good for the democracy. So again, This is about making sure that we keep the foundation of what has made our country strong, which is our democratic processes, the engagement and involvement of everyday citizens, and the recognition that every single constituent that I have, every single constituent that every senator and every member of Congress has, and that the President of the United States has an equal voice and an equal vote in this democracy. And we have to have people in government who believe they are actually accountable and are not spending all their time trying to skew the playing field so they don't need to be. And that's a challenge we have at this moment in our history. It's also a challenge that we can respond to with strength, with vigor, with decency, and I am confident that we will.
Good way to end it. I think it's a good way to end the program. It's been lively and very informative, and I just want to thank you, Senator, for all that you do on behalf of not just your constituents here, but really for the country, and being such a vigilant advocate on so many of these important issues that we need that voice. And you know, if I had more time, I'd get into how you have a wonderful relationship with Todd Young, Republican, Indiana, that you find common ground on a couple of key issues. So, you know, that's what we need more of, is to find the common. And that Medicaid, what bothers me is if they're really talking about a 20% cut or a third cut, there are nursing homes, there are community health centers, there are mental
rural
health
hospitals,
centers, and there are hospitals in red states that will say, if you cut but if I'm a rural hospital that takes care of the poor, the indigent, and the disabled, elderly, you cut me 20%, we have to close. I would think that that would be the red line, that more of both parties would get together and say, can't afford that. We cannot afford it. Because it's a red state, a blue state. It's not just, you know, one area of the country. So I would think that would be an opportunity to get together to say, no, we can't allow this to happen. We got to speak loud voice, united.
I think, especially around that issue, especially around rural health care, we are seeing some of that, and I am hopeful that that's one of the places where we can begin to have bipartisan expressions of concern. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, and enjoy the day.